I was sitting at my kitchen table in my house in Boulder, Colorado, sorting through paperwork for my pet-sitting business when the knock came at my door that would change everything. The woman standing on my porch looked like she had just stepped out of a country club board meeting. Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive bob that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and her pantsuit probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She held a clipboard against her chest like it was some kind of shield, and her mouth was already twisted into a disapproving frown before I even opened the door fully. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone friendly despite the alarm bells going off in my head. "Are you Jake Emerson?" She demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "That's me. I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss the illegal business you're operating out of your home." My stomach dropped. I had been running my pet sitting service for 3 years now, ever since I moved into this neighborhood. It started as a side hustle while I worked as a veterinary technician, but over time it had grown into a full-time operation. I never caused problems, never had complaints from neighbors, and always made sure to follow every regulation I could find about home-based businesses in Boulder County. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, genuinely confused. "My business is completely legal. I have all the proper permits and licenses." Brenda's expression hardened. "According to our HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, no commercial businesses are permitted to operate within residential properties in Meadowbrook Hills. You have been in violation since you started this little pet operation 3 years ago." "I've been living here for 3 years and nobody said anything before," I pointed out. "That's because we only recently became aware of the extent of your activities," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Multiple residents have reported excessive noise, strange vehicles coming and going at all hours, and general disruption to the peaceful enjoyment of their properties." That was complete nonsense. I ran a professional operation. Most of my clients dropped their pets off in the morning and picked them up in the evening. I had a dedicated space in my home for the animals, soundproofed walls to minimize any barking, and I never kept more than 5 animals at a time. My immediate neighbors, the Wilsons and the Hartleys, had both used my services and loved them. "Who complained?" I asked. "That information is confidential," Brenda said primly. "What matters is that you're in violation of our HOA regulations, and you need to cease operations immediately or face legal action." "I'd like to see where in the HOA documents it says I can't run a business from my home," I said, feeling my temper starting to rise. "Because when I bought this house, I specifically checked, and there was nothing prohibiting home-based businesses as long as they don't create a nuisance." Brenda pulled a thick stack of papers from her clipboard and thrust them at me. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subparagraph C clearly states that no commercial enterprise shall be conducted on any residential lot without express written permission from the HOA board. I took the papers and quickly scanned through them. She was right, technically. The language was there, buried in the middle of a dense legal document. But there were also provisions for requesting permission, and a clause that said permission could only be denied if the business created documented problems for the neighborhood. "Okay, so I'll apply for permission," I said. "According to this, I have the right to request approval." "Your request will be denied," Brenda said flatly. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that your business is a nuisance and violates the character of our residential community." "But you have no documentation of any actual problems," I countered. "You just said people complained about noise and traffic, but I know that's not true. I keep detailed records of every animal I watch, every pickup and drop-off time, and I've never had a single incident." Brenda's face was turning red now. "Mr. Emerson, you can argue all you want, but the fact remains that you are operating without approval. You have 72 hours to cease all business activities, or we will file an injunction in district court. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes SUV, leaving me standing in my doorway holding a stack of HOA documents and feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. I spent the rest of that day reading through every word of the HOA covenants. The more I read, the angrier I got. The provision Brenda cited was clearly meant to prevent things like auto repair shops or manufacturing businesses that would genuinely disrupt a neighborhood. My pet sitting service was quiet, clean, and professional. I had liability insurance, a business license from the city of Boulder, and even a specialized permit from the county for in-home animal care. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating. I walked over to my neighbor Phil Wilson's house and knocked on his door. Phil was a retired postal worker in his 60s, a friendly guy who always waved when he saw me outside. "Hey, Jake," he said when he opened the door. "What's up? Did you file a complaint about my pet sitting business with the HOA?" I asked directly. His face immediately showed confusion. "What? No, why would I? You watched Max for us last month when we went to visit our daughter in Denver. You're great with animals. Someone told the HOA that neighbors were complaining about noise and traffic from my business." Phil shook his head firmly. "Not me, and I can't imagine who would. You're the quietest business I've ever seen. Half the time I forget you even have dogs over there because they're so well behaved." I thanked him and went to talk to the Hartleys on the other side of my house. Susan Hartley answered the door with her 2-year-old daughter on her hip. "Jake, hi," she said warmly. "If you're here about watching Pepper next week, we're still on for that." "Actually, I'm here about something else," I said and explained the situation. Susan looked shocked. "That's ridiculous. We've never had any issues with your business. Honestly, it's been a lifesaver for us. We can't afford those expensive boarding facilities, and you take such good care of Pepper." I spent the next few hours talking to everyone on my street. Not a single person had filed a complaint. Most of them didn't even realize there was an issue. Several of them were regular clients who relied on my services. By the afternoon, I had a pretty good idea of what was happening. This wasn't about legitimate complaints. This was about Brenda Patterson having some kind of personal vendetta against me or my business. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which, according to the documents Brenda had given me, was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center. I had 5 days to prepare. I spent those 5 days gathering documentation. I compiled every single record from my business: client lists, pick-up and drop-off logs, noise complaints. There were 0. Insurance documents, licensing paperwork, and testimonials from satisfied customers. I also researched Colorado law regarding HOAs and home-based businesses. What I found was interesting. Colorado had specific statutes protecting homeowners who ran certain types of businesses from their homes. The law stated that HOAs couldn't blanketly prohibit home-based businesses without legitimate cause, and they had to provide a fair hearing process before taking enforcement action. Tuesday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center with a folder full of documents and a determination to fight for my business. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat, and rows of chairs for residents. Brenda sat in the center seat, flanked by 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them: Richard Chen, a software engineer who lived 3 streets over, and Margaret Foster, an elderly woman who had lived in Meadowbrook Hills since the neighborhood was built in the early 2000s. The other two were strangers to me. About 15 other residents were scattered throughout the chairs. I took a seat in the front row, directly in Brenda's line of sight. The meeting started with typical HOA business: approval of the previous meeting's minutes, a discussion about landscaping maintenance for the common areas, and a debate about whether to repave the tennis courts. I sat through it all, waiting for my turn. Finally, under new business, Brenda cleared her throat and said, "We need to address a compliance issue involving a resident who is operating an illegal commercial business from his home." She proceeded to present her case against me, making it sound like I was running some kind of animal hoarding operation that was destroying the neighborhood's property values and quality of life. She threw around phrases like excessive noise pollution and constant traffic disturbances and violation of residential zoning. When she finished, Richard Chen, one of the other board members, spoke up. "Have we received formal complaints about this business?" "Multiple residents have expressed concerns," Brenda said vaguely. "How many?" Richard pressed. "I don't have an exact number available at this moment." "Who specifically?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "That information is kept confidential to protect residents who come forward." "But we as board members should have access to that information," Richard said. "We can't make decisions about enforcement without knowing the facts." "The facts are that this business violates our covenants," Brenda snapped. Margaret Foster raised her hand timidly. "I think we should hear from Mr. Emerson before we make any decisions." All eyes turned to me. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, setting my folder down on the table. "My name is Jake Emerson, and I've been a resident of Meadowbrook Hills for 3 years. I run a licensed, insured, professional pet-sitting business from my home. I have permits from both the city of Boulder and Boulder County. I carry $1 million in liability insurance. I maintain detailed records of every animal in my care, and I've never had a single incident, complaint, or problem in the 3 years I've been operating." I opened my folder and started distributing copies of my documentation to each board member. "I spoke with every neighbor on my street after Miss Patterson visited me last week. Not one of them has filed a complaint about my business. In fact, several of them are regular clients who rely on my services. I've brought testimonials from 12 current clients, all of whom are residents of this neighborhood." I handed out the testimonials, watching as the board members started reading them. According to Colorado Revised Statutes Section 3833.3106, homeowners associations in Colorado cannot prohibit home-based businesses without legitimate documented cause. They also must provide a fair hearing process before taking enforcement action. Miss Patterson gave me a 72-hour ultimatum to shut down my business without any hearing or due process. Brenda's face was getting red again. "We have every right to enforce our covenants." "You have the right to enforce them fairly and according to state law," I said. "And you have to show actual harm or violation, not just claim it exists." Richard Chen was nodding as he read through my documents. "This is impressive," he said. "You've clearly put a lot of effort into running a professional operation." "I take my business seriously," I said. "I love animals, and I love what I do. I would never do anything to cause problems for my neighbors." Margaret Foster smiled at me. "You watched my sister's cat last year when she came to visit and they went on that day trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. She said you were wonderful." "Thank you," I said. One of the other board members, a middle-aged man whose name plate read David Morrison, spoke up. "I have to say, I'm not seeing any evidence of the problems Miss Patterson described. These testimonials all praise Mr. Emerson's business." "The complaints were verbal," Brenda insisted. "People don't always want to put things in writing." But we need documentation to take enforcement action, Richard said firmly. We can't just shut down someone's livelihood based on vague, unsubstantiated complaints. I have personal knowledge of the disturbances, Brenda said, her voice rising. I live 2 streets away from Mr. Emerson, and I've personally observed excessive traffic and noise. You live on Oakmont Drive, I said. That's 4 blocks away from my house on Elm Street. You can't possibly hear anything from my property at that distance. I've driven past your house multiple times and seen the chaos, she shot back. What chaos specifically? I asked. Because I keep records of every vehicle that comes to my property, and it averages 3 to 5 cars per day. That's fewer than most families with teenage drivers. The meeting was starting to turn, and I could see Brenda losing control of the situation. The other board members were clearly skeptical of her claims, and the residents in attendance were murmuring amongst themselves. Then something unexpected happened. A man in the back row stood up. He was tall, probably in his early 50s, with graying hair and an expensive suit. "If I may interject," he said. "My name is Thomas Ellington, and I'm a resident of Sycamore Court. I'm also an attorney specializing in HOA law." Brenda's face went pale. Thomas walked to the front of the room with the confident stride of someone who knew he had the upper hand. "I've been listening to this discussion with great interest, and I have to say, Miss Patterson, you're exposing this HOA to significant legal liability." "How dare you?" Brenda started, but Thomas held up a hand. "Colorado law is very clear on this matter. HOAs cannot arbitrarily enforce selective compliance. They cannot shut down home-based businesses without documented cause, and they absolutely cannot deny due process to homeowners. If this board votes to shut down Mr. Emerson's business based on the lack of evidence presented here tonight, he would have grounds for a lawsuit that would likely cost this HOA tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and damages." The room fell silent. The other board members looked worried. "Furthermore," Thomas continued, "if it comes to light that this enforcement action was motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate concerns, that could constitute harassment and open up even more legal issues." Brenda was visibly shaking now, whether from anger or fear I couldn't tell. "I move that we table this matter pending a formal investigation," Richard Chen said. "We should review Mr. Emerson's documentation, verify whether there are any legitimate complaints, and give him an opportunity to formally apply for approval to operate his business under the provisions outlined in Section 12. "I second that motion," Margaret Foster said quickly. "All in favor?" Richard asked. 4 hands went up. Brenda sat with her arms crossed, the only dissenting vote. "Motion carries," Richard said. "Mr. Emerson will be in touch within 30 days with our decision. In the meantime, you're free to continue operating your business." I thanked the board and gathered my documents. As I walked out of the community center, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Thomas Ellington, the attorney. "Good work in there," he said. "You handled yourself well. Thank you, and thanks for speaking up." "I've had my eye on Brenda Patterson for a while now," Thomas said. "She's been abusing her position as HOA president for the past year. This isn't the first time she's gone after someone with questionable motives." "Really?" Thomas nodded. "She tried to fine a couple on my street because she didn't like the color they painted their front door. It was well within the approved color palette, but she claimed it was too bright. She also attempted to force another neighbor to remove his vegetable garden because she thought it looked unsightly, even though the covenants specifically allow gardens. Why hasn't anyone challenged her before?" "Most people don't want the hassle," Thomas said. "They just comply to avoid the fight. But your situation is different. You're running a legitimate business and you've done everything right. I think you could actually be the catalyst for some positive change around here." "What do you mean?" "Brenda's term as president is up for election in 3 months," Thomas explained. "A lot of residents are unhappy with her leadership, but nobody has stepped up to run against her. If you successfully defend your business and show people that she can be challenged, it might encourage others to get involved in HOA governance." I hadn't thought about it that way. I was just trying to protect my livelihood, but Thomas was seeing the bigger picture. "Do you think the board will approve my business?" I asked. "Based on what I saw tonight, yes. Richard Chen and Margaret Foster are reasonable people, and I suspect David Morrison is too. The fifth board member, Linda Stevens, didn't say much tonight, but I know her to be fair-minded." "You have the votes." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "That's a relief." "Don't celebrate yet," Thomas warned. "Brenda doesn't strike me as someone who takes defeat gracefully. Watch your back." He was right to warn me. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door. It claimed I had violated HOA regulations by failing to maintain my lawn to acceptable standards. I walked outside and looked at my yard. The grass was perfectly trimmed, the hedges were neat, and there wasn't a single weed visible. This was clearly retaliation. I took photos of my yard from every angle, time-stamped them, and sent them along with a formal complaint to the HOA board, copying all 5 members. Within an hour, I got a response from Richard Chen apologizing for the notice and stating that it had been issued in error and would be rescinded. 2 days later, another violation notice appeared, this time claiming my trash cans were visible from the street. According to the covenants, trash cans had to be stored out of sight except on collection days. I had literally put my cans out that morning for pickup, which was scheduled for later that day. Again, I documented everything and filed a complaint. Richard Chen called me that evening. "Jake, I want to apologize for these frivolous violations. The board is aware of what's happening and we're addressing it." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we're having a serious conversation with Brenda about abuse of authority. She can't use her position to harass residents she has personal conflicts with. I appreciate that, but I'm worried about what she might do next." "So are we," Richard admitted. "Look, between you and me, there's going to be a special board meeting next week to discuss Brenda's conduct. It's not public, but I think you should know that several board members are considering a vote of no confidence." "Can you do that?" "According to our bylaws, yes. If 4 out of 5 board members vote that the president is not fulfilling their duties appropriately, we can remove them from the position and hold a special election." This was getting more complicated than I ever imagined. All I wanted was to run my pet-sitting business in peace, and now I was somehow in the middle of HOA politics. The following week was quiet. No violation notices appeared, no complaints materialized, and my business continued as usual. I watched a golden retriever named Buddy for a family vacationing in Vail, took care of 2 cats for an elderly couple going to visit their grandchildren in California, and did a drop-in visit for a woman's guinea pigs while she worked long shifts at the hospital. Then on Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Richard Chen. "Jake, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me for coffee?" We met at a small cafe near the Meadowbrook Hills neighborhood. Richard looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. "What's going on?" I asked after we both had coffee in front of us. "The board met 2 days ago to discuss Brenda's conduct," Richard said. "It didn't go well." "What happened?" "We confronted her about the retaliatory violations she issued against you. She denied that they were retaliatory and claimed she was just doing her job enforcing HOA regulations. Then she accused the rest of the board of failing in our fiduciary duties by not supporting her enforcement actions." That's ridiculous. It gets worse, Richard continued. She threatened to sue the board members individually if we vote to remove her from the presidency. She claims it would be a breach of the bylaws and grounds for legal action. Can she do that? Probably not successfully, but she can make our lives difficult and expensive. Most of us don't have the time or money to fight a lawsuit, even if we know we'd win eventually. I felt frustrated. So she's just going to keep abusing her power? Not necessarily, Richard said, and his expression changed to something more calculating. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I have an idea, but it's a bit unorthodox. I'm listening. Brenda's main motivation for going after your business is that she sees it as a threat to property values. She's obsessed with maintaining what she calls the prestigious character of Meadowbrook Hills. She thinks home-based businesses make the neighborhood look low class. That's absurd. Of course it is, but that's how she thinks. Here's the thing, though. Brenda also cares deeply about the HOA's finances and the neighborhood's amenities. She's been pushing hard to fund renovations for the community pool and the playground. Okay, so what's your idea? Richard leaned forward. What if your business could directly benefit the HOA? What if you could provide a service that would make you an asset rather than a liability in Brenda's eyes? I thought about it for a moment. What kind of service? We've had ongoing issues with wildlife in the neighborhood. People's trash cans getting raided by raccoons, concerns about coyotes near the playground, that sort of thing. The HOA has been paying an outside company about $5,000 a year to deal with wildlife management. But their response time is terrible, and they're not always effective. And you think I could do better? You're a trained veterinary technician with expertise in animal behavior. You already have the insurance and licensing for animal-related work. What if you offered to provide wildlife management services to the HOA at a reduced rate in exchange for official approval of your pet-sitting business? It was clever. Really clever. You think Brenda would go for that? If we present it the right way, yes. It saves the HOA money, solves a problem that residents have been complaining about, and it makes you a valuable community resource instead of a nuisance. What about the rest of the board? Margaret is already on your side. David Morrison is a financial guy, so if the numbers make sense, he'll support it. Linda Stevens follows Margaret's lead on most things. If we can get Brenda to buy in, even reluctantly, we'll have unanimous support. I thought about it. I didn't love the idea of having to offer my services just to get approval to run my existing business, but I understood the practical reality. Sometimes you have to play the game to win. How would this work logistically? I asked. You'd submit a formal proposal to the board outlining the wildlife management services you could provide, your qualifications, and your pricing. We'd present it at the next regular board meeting along with your application for business approval. The two items would be linked. The HOA gets wildlife management services and you get approval for your pet sitting operation. When's the next meeting? 2 weeks from yesterday. I agreed to the plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I put together the most professional proposal I'd ever created. I researched wildlife management best practices, outlined my qualifications, detailed the specific services I would provide, and calculated pricing that would save the HOA about 30% compared to their current contractor, while still being worth my time. I also reached out to the Colorado Division of Parks and Wildlife to make sure I understood all the regulations around wildlife management. I didn't want to promise anything I couldn't legally deliver. The day before the board meeting, Richard called me with an update. I talked to Brenda about your proposal. She's suspicious, but she's interested. The cost savings got her attention. Did you tell her it's contingent on approving my pet sitting business? Not yet. I thought we'd present that at the meeting, so she has to make a decision in front of the other board members and the residents. It's harder for her to be unreasonable when there's an audience. The next evening, I arrived at the community center with my proposal printed and bound in neat folders. The meeting room was more crowded than last time. Word had gotten around about the conflict between me and Brenda, and people were curious about how it would play out. The meeting followed the usual format: minutes, old business, committee reports. Then Richard called for new business and nodded at me. Mr. Emerson has prepared a proposal for wildlife management services that I think the board will find very interesting, Richard said. Jake, would you like to present? I stood up and distributed my folders to each board member, plus a few extras for residents who wanted to follow along. Thank you for the opportunity to present this proposal, I began. As many of you know, I'm a veterinary technician with specialized training in animal behavior and wildlife management. I've been a resident of Meadowbrook Hills for 3 years, and in that time, I've observed that our neighborhood deals with recurring wildlife issues. Raccoons in trash areas, coyotes near common spaces, and occasional concerns about aggressive geese at the pond. Several residents nodded in recognition. These were real issues that affected the community. Currently, the HOA contracts with Front Range Wildlife Services for wildlife management at a cost of approximately $5,000 per year. According to the financial documents provided to residents, response times from this contractor average 48 to 72 hours, and solutions are often temporary. I saw Brenda shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She knew where this was going. I'm proposing to provide comprehensive wildlife management services to Meadowbrook Hills at a rate of $3,500 per year. This represents a savings of $1,500 annually for the HOA. More importantly, as a neighborhood resident, I can respond to wildlife issues within hours rather than days, and I can provide education to residents about coexisting with local wildlife in ways that prevent future problems. I went through the details of my proposal: humane wildlife exclusion techniques, habitat modification recommendations, emergency response protocols for aggressive animals, and quarterly educational workshops for residents. When I finished, David Morrison spoke first. This is an excellent proposal. The cost savings alone make it worth considering, but the improved response time is even more valuable. Margaret Foster agreed. I think it's wonderful that we have someone in the community with this expertise. Why pay an outside company when we have a qualified resident? Linda Stevens nodded along with Margaret. Brenda was silent, studying the proposal with a frown. There is one condition to this proposal, I said, deciding to lay all the cards on the table. My offer to provide these services is contingent on the board approving my application to operate my pet sitting business from my home. The room got very quiet. Brenda looked up sharply. That sounds like extortion. It's not extortion, I said calmly. It's a business decision. I'm willing to provide additional services to the community, but only if the community is willing to support my existing business. I think that's fair. We can find another wildlife management contractor, Brenda said. At a higher cost with worse service, Richard pointed out. Jake's proposal is objectively better than what we have now, and his pet sitting business has never caused any documented problems, Margaret added. We've reviewed the evidence, and there's no legitimate reason to deny his application. Brenda looked trapped. I could see her mind working, trying to find a way out of this situation that would let her maintain her position without looking unreasonable. I need time to review the wildlife management proposal more thoroughly, she said finally. We can vote on both items tonight, Richard said. We've had plenty of time to review Jake's business application, and the wildlife management proposal is straightforward. I move that we approve Jake Emerson's application to operate his pet sitting business from his home, David Morrison said. I second, Margaret said immediately. All in favor? Richard asked. 4 hands went up. Brenda kept hers down but didn't say anything. Motion carries, Richard announced. Jake, your business is officially approved. Relief flooded through me. Finally, after weeks of stress and conflict, I could operate my business without looking over my shoulder. Now for the wildlife management proposal, Richard continued. I move that we accept Jake Emerson's proposal for wildlife management services and terminate our contract with Front Range Wildlife Services. Second, Linda Stevens said. This time all 5 hands went up, including Brenda's. She might not have liked it, but she couldn't argue against saving the HOA $1,500 a year. After the meeting, several residents came up to congratulate me and thank me for standing up to Brenda. Thomas Ellington, the attorney who had spoken up at the first meeting, shook my hand. Brilliant strategy, he said. You turned yourself from a problem into an asset. She couldn't fight that without looking petty. It was Richard Chen's idea, I admitted. Still, you executed it perfectly. I suspect this isn't over, though. Brenda doesn't forgive easily. He was right, but not in the way I expected. The next few weeks were actually peaceful. I continued my pet sitting business without interference, and I started my wildlife management work for the HOA. My first call came on a Saturday morning when a resident reported a family of raccoons that had taken up residence in their garage. I went over with humane traps and managed to relocate the entire family to a suitable habitat in the nearby foothills within 24 hours. The residents were thrilled with the quick response. I also discovered that I really enjoyed the wildlife management work. It was satisfying to solve problems and educate people about living alongside wildlife. I started writing a monthly newsletter for the HOA about seasonal wildlife issues and prevention tips. Margaret Foster told me it was the most read section of the HOA communications. Then, about 6 weeks after the board meeting that approved my business, I got a call from Thomas Ellington. Jake, you need to hear something. Can we meet? We met at the same cafe as before. Thomas looked serious. What's going on? I asked. I've learned something disturbing about Brenda Patterson, and it involves you. My stomach tightened. What is it? Do you remember how Brenda claimed that multiple residents had complained about your business, but she never provided any documentation or names? Yes. I did some digging through HOA records. I'm on the Architectural Review Committee, so I have access to filing systems. There were no complaints about your business, Jake, not a single one. I suspected that, but I couldn't prove it. It gets worse, Thomas continued. I found emails between Brenda and her sister, who doesn't even live in our neighborhood. Brenda's sister runs a pet boarding facility in Superior. Brenda was trying to shut down your business to eliminate competition for her sister's operation. I felt anger rising in my chest. She went after my livelihood to help her sister's business. That's exactly what she did. And she used her position as HOA president to do it, which is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. She's supposed to act in the best interests of the HOA and its residents, not use her power for personal benefit. What can we do about it? The board needs to know about this. If they're aware that Brenda fabricated complaints and abused her authority for personal gain, they have grounds to remove her immediately. No special election needed. Will they do it? Richard Chen will. I've already spoken to him confidentially. He's furious. Margaret Foster will support it too. That's 3 votes, which is enough. What about Brenda? Will she fight back? Thomas smiled grimly. She can try, but she'd be fighting from a very weak position. Using HOA authority for personal financial benefit could even be considered fraud or breach of fiduciary duty in civil court. If she pushes back, she could face legal consequences beyond just losing her board position. 3 days later, there was an emergency special meeting of the HOA board. It was announced with only 48 hours' notice, which was the minimum required by the bylaws. I attended, along with about 20 other residents who were curious about what was important enough to warrant a special session. Richard Chen called the meeting to order and got straight to the point. We're here tonight to address serious allegations regarding misconduct by a board member, he said. Specifically, allegations that HOA authority was used to pursue personal interests rather than the interests of the community. He proceeded to lay out everything Thomas had discovered: the fabricated complaints, the emails with Brenda's sister, the clear conflict of interest. He had printed copies of the emails and other documentation, which he distributed to the board members and the residents in attendance. Brenda's face went from red to white to red again as Richard presented the evidence. She tried to interrupt several times, but Richard shut her down. "You'll have an opportunity to respond when I'm finished," he said firmly. When Richard completed his presentation, he turned to Brenda. "Do you deny any of these allegations?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed several times. Finally, she said, "I was acting in the best interests of the neighborhood. Home-based businesses do affect property values." "That's not the question," Richard said. "Did you fabricate complaints about Jake Emerson's business?" Silence. "Did you use your position as HOA president to try to eliminate a perceived business competitor for your sister's pet boarding facility?" More silence. "Your refusal to answer is answer enough," Richard said. "I move that Brenda Patterson be removed from her position as HOA president and from the board of directors effective immediately for breach of fiduciary duty and abuse of authority." "Second," Margaret Foster said, her voice sad but firm. "All in favor." 4 hands went up. Brenda sat frozen, not voting on her own removal. Motion carries. "Brenda, you are no longer a member of this board. Please surrender any HOA documents, keys, or other materials in your possession to me within 72 hours. Brenda stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice shaking. "All of you." She stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in conversation. Some residents looked shocked, others satisfied, a few uncomfortable with the whole situation. Richard gavelled for order. "We'll need to hold a special election to fill the vacant board seat and elect a new president. In the meantime, as vice president, I'll assume the responsibilities of president pro tempore." After the meeting, I approached Richard. "Thank you for doing that. It couldn't have been easy." He shook his head. "It wasn't, but it was necessary. What Brenda did was wrong, and it could have exposed the HOA to serious liability. If you had decided to sue over her actions, we would have been in real trouble." "I never wanted any of this," I said. "I just wanted to run my business." "I know. But sometimes standing up for yourself has consequences beyond what you intended. You've actually done this community a service by exposing how Brenda was operating." Over the next few weeks, things settled into a new normal. The special election was held, and a woman named Patricia Hoffman, a retired teacher who had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 15 years, was elected to fill Brenda's seat. Richard Chen was formally elected as HOA president. My business continued to thrive. The wildlife management work became a significant part of my income, and I was getting referrals for pet sitting from satisfied customers throughout the neighborhood. I hired an assistant, a college student studying veterinary medicine, to help with the growing workload. I thought the drama was finally over, but I was wrong. About 3 months after Brenda's removal from the board, I was working in my yard on a Saturday morning when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Are you Jake Emerson?" she asked. "That's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Brenda Patterson. I'm Brenda Patterson's daughter." I felt my guard go up immediately. "Okay. I wanted to talk to you about what happened with my mother and the HOA. "I'm not sure there's anything to discuss," I said carefully. "Please, just hear me out," Deborah said. "I know what my mother did was wrong. She told me about trying to shut down your business to help my aunt's boarding facility. I was horrified when I found out." "Why are you here?" Deborah took a deep breath. "My mother is not well, mentally speaking. She's always been controlling and obsessive about certain things, but it's gotten worse in the past few years. The HOA presidency gave her a sense of power that she became addicted to. When she lost that, she spiraled. I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't know what you want from me." "She's been making threats," Deborah said. "Vague things about getting revenge, making people pay for humiliating her. I'm worried she might try to do something to hurt you or your business." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of threats specifically?" "Nothing concrete enough that I could go to the police with, but enough that I felt I should warn you. She's been driving past your house at odd hours. She's been asking my aunt for information about pet sitting licensing and regulations, like she's looking for some way to cause problems for you." "Has she done anything actionable?" "Not yet, but I know my mother. When she fixates on something, she doesn't let it go. I just wanted you to be aware and careful." After Deborah left, I called Thomas Ellington and told him about the conversation. "That's concerning," Thomas said. "Let me do some checking. In the meantime, I'd suggest installing security cameras if you don't already have them." I took his advice and had a security system installed that afternoon. Cameras covered my driveway, front door, and backyard. I also made sure all my business documents were backed up in the cloud and secured with strong passwords. For a week, nothing happened. Then on Thursday evening, I got an alert from my security system. Someone was in my backyard. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and saw Brenda Patterson standing near my garage, looking around furtively. She was carrying something, but I couldn't see what it was in the dim light. I called 911. "Boulder Police, what's your emergency?" "There's someone trespassing on my property. I have them on my security camera." The dispatcher took my information and said officers were on the way. I kept watching the camera feed. Brenda walked over to my garage door and appeared to be doing something near the ground. Then she moved to the side gate that led to my backyard animal area. By the time the police arrived 5 minutes later, Brenda had left. But the responding officers found what she had been doing. She had spread raw meat near my garage and along the fence line, clearly trying to attract wildlife to my property. She had also opened the latches on 2 of my enclosures where I was currently keeping a client's dog and another client's rabbit. Fortunately, the animals hadn't gotten out yet because I had secondary locks that Brenda apparently didn't know about. But her intent was clear. She was trying to create a situation that would look like my business was attracting nuisance wildlife and that I was negligent about securing animals in my care. The officers took statements and reviewed my security footage. The video clearly showed Brenda's face and her actions. "We'll be issuing a warrant for her arrest," one of the officers told me. "This is trespassing, attempted animal cruelty, and potentially criminal mischief. You might also have grounds for a civil restraining order." Brenda was arrested the next morning. The charges were serious enough that she spent the night in jail before making bail. Thomas Ellington helped me file for a temporary restraining order, which was granted immediately based on the security footage and the police report. The story spread through Meadowbrook Hills like wildfire. Most residents were shocked and appalled by Brenda's actions. A few people who had been her friends tried to defend her, claiming she was having a mental health crisis and needed help rather than prosecution, but even they couldn't excuse what she had done. The district attorney's office treated the case seriously. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested in being lenient. Attempted animal cruelty is a serious charge in Colorado, especially when it's premeditated. The case went to trial 4 months later. I had to testify about the entire history of my conflict with Brenda, from her initial attempt to shut down my business through the board's discovery of her conflict of interest, and finally to the night she trespassed on my property. The security footage was damning. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: trespassing, attempted animal cruelty, and criminal mischief. Brenda was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution for the cost of my security system and legal fees. She was also required to undergo mental health counseling. The restraining order was made permanent, prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of my property or having any contact with me. In a strange twist, Brenda's sister's pet boarding facility in Superior went out of business during all of this. Apparently, the negative publicity from the case caused many clients to take their business elsewhere. I felt a little bad about that, because the sister hadn't directly done anything wrong, but I also couldn't help feeling a sense of justice. Life finally settled down after the trial. My business continued to grow, and I became a valued member of the Meadowbrook Hills community. Richard Chen turned out to be an excellent HOA president, focused on transparency and fairness. He established new policies requiring board members to disclose any conflicts of interest, and created a formal appeals process for residents who disagreed with HOA decisions. I continued providing wildlife management services, and even expanded that side of my business to work with 2 other nearby neighborhoods. The combination of pet sitting and wildlife management turned into a thriving full-service animal care company. I hired 2 more employees and eventually moved my operations to a small commercial property outside the neighborhood, though I kept my house in Meadowbrook Hills. About a year after Brenda's trial, I was at the community center for the annual HOA meeting when Thomas Ellington approached me. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" "For fighting back when Brenda came after you. A lot of people would have just given up and shut down their business to avoid the conflict. But you stood your ground, and in doing so, you exposed a real problem with how our HOA was being run. Things are better now because you were willing to fight." "I was just trying to protect my business," I said. "Maybe, but you ended up protecting all of us. Brenda could have continued abusing her power for years if you hadn't challenged her. Who knows how many other residents she would have targeted?" I thought about that. It was true that other people had mentioned previous conflicts with Brenda over minor HOA violations and arbitrary rules. She had created an atmosphere of fear and compliance that had gone unchallenged for too long. "I guess sometimes you have to stand up to bullies," I said, "even when they have authority over you." "Especially then," Thomas agreed. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past year and a half. It had started with a simple knock on my door and a woman telling me I had to shut down my business. It had escalated into HOA politics, legal battles, and even a criminal trial. But through it all, I had learned something important about standing up for yourself and refusing to be intimidated. I had also learned that communities are built by people willing to fight for fairness and accountability. Richard Chen, Thomas Ellington, Margaret Foster, and the other board members who supported me had all played crucial roles in pushing back against abuse of authority. My business was stronger than ever. I had great employees, satisfied clients, and a reputation as someone who stood by his principles. The wildlife management work had opened up new opportunities. I never would have discovered if Brenda hadn't forced me to get creative about defending my pet sitting operation. In a weird way, I was almost grateful to Brenda Patterson. Her vindictive attempt to destroy my business had pushed me to become a better business owner, a more engaged community member, and a stronger person overall. I pulled into my driveway and saw my assistant's car already there. We had 3 dogs and a cat staying with us this weekend, and I could hear happy barking from inside the house. I smiled as I walked to the door. This was my life now, running a successful business, helping my community, and doing work I loved. It hadn't been an easy road, but it had been worth fighting for. The security cameras I had installed after Deborah's warning were still in place, though I rarely checked them anymore. They served as a reminder of how far things had gone, but also as a symbol of how I had protected what mattered to me. Inside, my assistant Sarah greeted me with a cheerful wave. She was playing with a chocolate Labrador in the living room while 2 smaller dogs watched from their crates and a gray tabby cat lounged on the cat tree in the corner. "How was the meeting?" Sarah asked. "Good. Boring, actually, which is exactly how HOA meetings should be." She laughed. "No drama with crazy board members?" "Nope. Those days are over, thankfully." We spent the next hour going over the schedule for the weekend, feeding times, medication for one of the dogs who had arthritis, and pickup times for Monday morning. Everything was organized and professional, exactly how I ran my business. After Sarah left, I sat down at my computer to update my records and respond to new booking inquiries. I had emails from 3 potential clients, all referrals from current customers. Word of mouth was my best advertising. As I worked, I thought about how close I had come to losing all of this. If I had backed down when Brenda first showed up at my door with her threats and her clipboard, I would have shut down my business. I would have lost not just my income, but my passion and my purpose. Instead, I had fought back, not with aggression or revenge, but with documentation, professionalism, and a refusal to be intimidated. I had built alliances with reasonable people like Richard Chen and Thomas Ellington. I had provided value to my community through the wildlife management services. I had turned a confrontation into an opportunity. The legal battle with Brenda had been stressful and sometimes scary, but it had taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself and not letting bullies win. It had shown me that authority figures aren't always right, and that sometimes the system works when good people are willing to engage with it. I finished updating my records and closed my laptop. Through the window, I could see the sun setting over the Colorado foothills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, exactly how a residential community should be. The dogs were settling down for the evening, tired from their play session with Sarah. The cat was grooming itself methodically on its perch. Everything was calm and orderly. I walked over to check on each animal, making sure they had fresh water and were comfortable. This was what I loved about my work: caring for animals, giving their owners peace of mind, and building trust through consistent, quality service. Tomorrow, I had a wildlife call scheduled for the morning. A resident had reported seeing coyotes near the playground, and I needed to assess the situation and provide recommendations. In the afternoon, I had 3 new pet-sitting clients coming for initial consultations. It was going to be a busy day, but a good one. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt grateful for how things had turned out. The conflict with Brenda Patterson had been a nightmare while it was happening, but it had ultimately made me stronger and my business better. I had learned to stand up for myself, to document everything, and to never underestimate the importance of building alliances with reasonable people. I had also learned that homeowners associations, like any organization, are only as good as the people running them. When good people are engaged and holding leaders accountable, HOAs can serve their intended purpose of maintaining community standards and organizing shared resources. But when bad actors gain power and use it for personal gain, they need to be challenged and removed. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA was in good hands now with Richard Chen as president. He had implemented reforms that made the organization more transparent and accountable. Board meetings were better attended because residents felt like their voices mattered. Enforcement actions were based on documented violations rather than personal vendettas. I drifted off to sleep that night feeling content and secure. My business was thriving, my community was stable, and I had proven to myself that I could face down bullies and win. The next morning, I woke up early and went through my usual routine, feeding the animals in my care, checking on their health and happiness, and cleaning their spaces. By 7 o'clock, everything was done and I was ready for my wildlife call. I drove to the playground where the coyote sightings had been reported. It was a beautiful morning, clear and cool with the mountains visible in the distance. I spent an hour walking the area, looking for signs of coyote activity, tracks, scat, den sites. What I found was typical for urban Colorado. Coyotes were passing through the area, probably attracted by the open space and the proximity to the foothills, but they weren't denning nearby or showing signs of aggressive behavior. I made notes and took photos to include in my report. My recommendation would be simple. Educate residents about coyote behavior, remind people not to leave pet food outside, and install motion-activated lights near the playground. The coyotes weren't a danger. They were just wild animals living in their natural habitat that happened to overlap with human development. This was the kind of work I found deeply satisfying. I was helping people understand and coexist with wildlife rather than seeing animals as problems to be eliminated. It was about education and prevention rather than reaction and removal. After completing my assessment, I headed back home for the afternoon consultations. All 3 went well. The clients were impressed with my facilities, my credentials, and my professional approach. They all booked their first stays, adding to my already busy schedule. Weeks turned into months, and life continued in this comfortable pattern. My business grew steadily. I hired another employee. I expanded my service area. I got certified in additional wildlife management techniques. The anniversary of the board meeting where my business was officially approved came and went without fanfare. I marked it privately as a turning point in my life, the moment when I stopped being a victim of HOA overreach and became an active defender of my rights. Richard Chen and I became friends outside of HOA business. We occasionally met for coffee or lunch, and he sometimes asked my advice about animal-related issues in the neighborhood. Thomas Ellington referred several clients to my business, and even asked me to provide expert testimony in another HOA case he was handling involving a different neighborhood. Margaret Foster's sister became one of my regular clients, booking me every time she visited from out of state. She always left generous tips and glowing reviews. The spot on the board that Brenda had vacated was filled permanently after the special election. And the new board member, Patricia Hoffman, brought a welcome dose of common sense and community focus to HOA governance. She started a neighborhood newsletter, organized community events, and generally helped make Meadowbrook Hills feel more like a real community rather than just a collection of houses governed by rules. I occasionally wondered what happened to Brenda Patterson after her release from jail. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved out of Meadowbrook Hills, selling her house and relocating to somewhere on the western slope of Colorado. Her daughter Deborah had apparently helped her get into a good mental health treatment program, which I hoped was helping her deal with whatever issues had driven her to such extreme behavior. I never heard from Brenda directly, which was fine with me. The restraining order remained in effect, and I had no desire to ever interact with her again. Some bridges are best left burned. My business continued to evolve and grow. I started offering specialized services like administering medications and caring for animals with special needs. I developed relationships with local veterinary clinics and became their preferred recommendation for clients who needed pet sitting services. The wildlife management side of my business expanded beyond just HOAs. I started working with the City of Boulder's Parks Department, helping them manage wildlife conflicts in public spaces. I gave presentations at schools about living safely with Colorado's wildlife. I wrote articles for local publications about coexisting with the animals that share our environment. Looking back on the whole experience, from that first knock on my door to where I stood now, I realized that Brenda Patterson had actually done me a favor, though not in the way she intended. Her attempt to shut down my business had forced me to fight for it, to professionalize it, and to expand it in ways I never would have considered otherwise. If she had never come after me, I probably would have continued running a small, comfortable pet sitting operation indefinitely. Instead, I now had a legitimate animal care company with multiple employees, diverse revenue streams, and a strong reputation throughout Boulder County. The experience had also taught me about the importance of community involvement and civic engagement. I started attending every HOA meeting, not because I had to, but because I wanted to be informed about what was happening in my neighborhood. I voted in every HOA election. I volunteered for committees when my schedule allowed. I learned that the best defense against petty tyrants and abusers of authority is active, engaged citizenship. When good people pay attention and participate, bad actors find it much harder to operate. Years from now, when I looked back on my time in Meadowbrook Hills, I knew I would remember this period as transformative. The conflict with Brenda Patterson had been difficult and sometimes frightening, but it had shaped me into a better business owner, a more engaged community member, and a stronger person. I had learned to document everything, to build alliances with reasonable people, to stand up for my rights without being aggressive or vindictive, and to turn challenges into opportunities. These were lessons that would serve me well for the rest of my life, both in business and in personal matters. The pets in my care didn't know or care about any of this history. They just knew that when they came to stay with me, they were safe, loved, and well cared for. That was what mattered most. Not the drama or the conflicts or the legal battles, but the simple act of doing good work and serving my clients well. As I locked up for the night and headed home, tired but satisfied after another long day, I felt grateful for where I was and how I got there. The journey had been rocky, but the destination was worth it. I had built something I was proud of, defended it when it was threatened, and emerged stronger on the other side. That's what standing up for yourself looks like in real life. It's not always dramatic or heroic. Sometimes it's just refusing to back down when someone tells you that you can't do something you have every right to do. It's documenting your case, building your alliances, and trusting that truth and reason will prevail if you give them a chance. My story wasn't unique. All over America, in countless neighborhoods and communities, people were having similar battles with overzealous HOA boards, petty bureaucrats, and small-minded authoritarians. Some of those people fought back and won. Others gave up and complied, surrendering their rights to avoid conflict. I was proud to be in the first category. I had fought for my business, my livelihood, and my rights as a homeowner. I had won not through aggression or intimidation, but through professionalism, documentation, and a refusal to be bullied. And in the end, that made all the difference.